I appreciate that. He is much too kind with that comment. So I appreciate the opportunity by Project 44 to come talk to you this morning. I do have questions about the idea of inviting a professor first thing in the morning to come talk to you. I'm not sure that's the greatest idea, but we're going to go with it. 3 years ago, back in March of 2021, I was that mild-mannered professor. I have no cape. I don't know what Eric's talking about. I have no cape, no superhero at all. I was just running basically my classes. I was a former merchant mariner. I swallowed the anchor, came ashore, decided to basically go into academia. The downfall for most mariners is what happened to me. I was sailing, I was having a great time, enjoying myself immensely, but then I came down with something that prevented me from continuing my sailing career. I got married. And wife could not live without me being at sea. That changed very quickly, can I be clear? About 5 years in, you can go back out to sea if you want, too late. I am ashore now, so I decided to really embrace the idea of understanding global logistics and shipping. And I teach courses in maritime history, maritime security, maritime policy. I'm at a very small rural college out in North Carolina, which doesn't make sense for teaching about global shipping. I mean, the mascot of my university is a camel. So it makes almost no sense. But in truth, it's perfect for me, because if I was at any other institution, a big university, if I was at a state maritime school or the Federal Maritime Academy, I couldn't be as critical and as kind of objective when I look at global shipping. So for me, this is the topic that I enjoy the most discussing. And back in March of 2021 is when it all started for me. So I don't know how many of you had on your bingo card of global shipping a ship getting stuck in the Suez. Not sure how many of you had on your global shipping bingo card 109 ships at anchor or drifting off the port of LA and Long Beach in 2022. Or how many of you had the Houthi attacking shipping and causing a 5,000-mile diversion around Africa, or a ship coming out of Baltimore taking out the Francis Scott Key Bridge and disrupting the 11th largest port in the United States for 2 months. Or just yesterday morning, ship coming out of Charleston, the MSC Michigan 7, had an issue coming out of the port where its throttle was stuck wide open and came barreling out of the port of Charleston at 15 knots, narrowly missing the bridge on the way out. That is what's going on in global shipping today. We're seeing lots of challenges with that. And it's kind of appropriate that we're having this event today on the 80th anniversary of the landings at D-Day. We're just 6 miles away from the U-505 over in the Chicago Museum there, where you can go see it. My interest in shipping really began with an interest in history. And if you look at what happened 80 years ago today, the focus tends to be on those first 30 minutes of Saving Private Ryan and the landing on Omaha Beach. But in truth, what World War II was entirely was a war of logistics. It was the side that was able to supply themselves, to secure the supply chain, that was the most important. In June of 1944, when the Allies land in Normandy at the same exact time, they're conducting operations to liberate Rome in the Mediterranean. The Soviets, through Lend-Lease, are starting the largest offensive operation in the history of the war, Operation Bagration. The British and Indians are fighting in Burma. The US is staging a massive invasion of the Marianas. Those are all going on concurrently. And they're victories not just of military forces, but of supply chains. And understanding supply chains and how successful supply chains are, whether it's commercial, whether it's military, is absolutely key. People look at this photo and look at kind of a big mess there, but that is a symphony of movement of cargo coming off the beach there that allowed the US to build up at a time when most navies and most countries could not do this. Snapshot of where the world's container ships are today. One of the greatest innovators of all time is a guy from North Carolina, where I'm from. About 50 miles from where I live was the birthplace of a guy by the name of Malcolm McLean. Malcolm McLean invented the global shipping container, intermodalism. He was a truck driver. He wasn't a shipper. He wasn't a guy who did shipping at all. He was a truck driver. He just realized there had to be a better way to move cargo. And he came up with a thing that has fundamentally changed the way we move goods around the planet. At the end of World War II, we were shipping 500 million tons of cargo around the world. Last year, we did about 12 billion tons. One of the things that's appropriately named for this conference is one of the things that we've changed is both the velocity and the volume of the amount of cargo that moves around the world. And that velocity and volume is what is the big hurdle for many of us to get over. When you look at where shipping is taking place on the world's ocean, and those are just container ships, we're not even talking about tankers or bulk carriers or any of the other forms of method of transportation, you can see how that world flows out of Asia, around the planet, using the world's oceans, the blue oceans, the great commons, so that we can deliver cargo on a ready basis. I took a couple of snapshots as just some news headlines over the past month in global shipping. I follow the big ocean carriers, the big 9 ocean carriers that are in 3 massive alliances that control 85% of the global shipping capacity. And if you've listened to the ocean carriers over the past couple of months, it's a tale of 2 cities. They went all Dickens on you. It's the best of times, it's the worst of times. They will tell you, oh, it's terrible, we're coming down, we're in lots of trouble, we've got overcapacity, freight rates are dropping, but then at the same time, you'll see them talking about, wow, we just seen this massive spike in the short-term rates. We're seeing it go up at a faster rate than we saw back in the end of 2023 when the Houthis initiated their attacks. And what you're seeing is kind of a mix. How do you permeate through that layer and understand what the real story is, because those stories conflict with each other all the time. What the carriers say are always not exactly full force phase. They're always trying to sell their best picture. And when you look here and you hear about the announcing of blank voyages, and all of a sudden spot rates are going to go up to $10,000, and that the profitability of the companies are going up, what is the true story behind it? We're going to peel that back here a little bit for you. So one of the biggest things to understand in global shipping, there are a lot of things that have changed and are changing right now in global shipping. If you move goods around the planet right now, the ocean carriers are changing the way they move goods, and this is going to impact you as the shipper. And the carriers themselves are changing, first off, their fleets. They're getting bigger. In 2013, Maersk Line, which is at the time the biggest ocean carrier in the world, introduced a new vessel called the Triple E. They went Triple E because they were talking about economy, efficiency, and the environment. They introduced the 18,000 TEU Supermax vessels. These vessels were capable of carrying massive amounts of containers. They built them in the yard in Korea. They built 20 of these in 2 years. And they started kind of an arms race for who can build the largest ships out there. And what you see is all the major ocean carriers have embraced these vessels, these massive mega ships. And these massive mega ships carry over 18,000 TEUs, the biggest ones over 24,000 TEUs, and those are becoming a big norm. The other vessels not shown here but are also being built are ships known as Neo-Panamax vessels. These are ships that can swing through the new lane of the Panama Canal. In 2016, we added a 3rd lane to the Panama Canal with a problem, as we'll talk about. But they added a new lane, which meant that you went from being able to move ships from Asia to the Gulf Coast to the East Coast of the United States, ships that previously could only carry 4,500 TEUs, up to 16,000 TEUs. And this is shifting the way we're moving goods around. Ocean carriers, back in 2008, had a big problem. We had that global recession. We had massive recession. The global shipping carriers had to get rid of assets. They had to bleed it. They didn't want to get rid of their ships, so they got rid of a lot of assets. They got rid of terminals, they got rid of containers, they got rid of chassis. It's why you have a lot of second agents and third agents involved in this aspect. But now one of the big things we're seeing them doing is buying ships. They're recapitalizing, they're buying ships, so they're spending a lot of their money to buy new ships. They're building ships and they're buying used ships, and they're building up their fleets. And then at the same time, the ocean carriers realize they have an 85% share of the marketplace. The 9 biggest companies are in 3 large alliances, which is about to change. We're about to see a change in the alliance system. It's undergoing a change right now. Now, it's not a cartel. They will tell you it's not a cartel. We don't use the word cartel around them. They get very upset when you use the word cartel around them. But what they say is we're a vessel sharing agreement. We pool our resources together to move cargo around, which means that they can also put ships on routes and also cancel them. You've all heard of blank sailings. and the ability of the carriers to kind of halt sailing of a vessel, and that will artificially inflate rates. And that has to do with profitability of container ships. So for COVID, for many of us, was a huge, massive undertaking. It was all of us suffered COVID in different ways, both personally and on a business aspect. For the ocean carriers, it was the best profits they ever had. If you look at 2021, they made more profits in that single year than they did in the decade prior to that, combined. And then 2022 was even better. And that put the ocean carriers in a prospect of really embracing this profitability. They saw an opportunity here. Now, 2023, not so much. You see that decline right there. But in the first quarter of 2024, when they were preaching how bad things were, they demonstrated massive profitability. Matter of fact, Maersk just redefined their profitability for the first quarter, going up $2 billion from where they thought they were at. And what we tend to see is this kind of sick heart rate here, kind of a squirrel on crack heartbeat here of profitability for these ocean carriers. Being a shipping guy, one of the things that we talk about all the time in shipping is choke points. What are the choke points? Whether for you, it's trucking, warehousing. For the oceans, it's geographic. And geographic choke points are all over the planet. We deal with them on a global basis. Some have been around for centuries, for millennium. Some are new. But one of the things we're seeing right now is global choke points are really grabbing a lot of attention. Whether it's the Bab el-Mandab between the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden, whether it's the Panama Canal, the South China Sea, the Black Sea, the Baltic, all these, many of you have all of a sudden become geopoliticians in ways you never thought you would be. Having to understand is like, what are the Houthi up to today? All of those play a role here. And I'm going to talk about just a couple of choke points here to give you the example here. So probably the most famous choke point that's being on right now is the Red Sea. Bab el-Mandab, the Gulf of Aden, the Houthi. Now, the Houthi are not a nation. They are a faction in a three-way civil war in Yemen. But what they started to do was throw missiles at ships. They're in solidarity with Hamas and the Palestinians. And since October 7th of last year, we've seen a war going on in Israel. It started dramatically in November with the capture of the Galaxy Leader, with a helicopter landing on the deck, seizing the vessel, ships still being held, crews still being held right now. But in mid-December, Maersk Lines announced, along with Hapag, that they were pulling their ships out. And what we've seen is a wholesale reduction in the number of ships. 2/3 the number of ships that you typically go through the Suez Canal don't go through the Suez Canal now. 3/4 of the tonnage is not going through the Suez Canal. These are those big mega ships. These are those ships over 18,000 TEU I talked about. None of them are going through that region now. They're all heading to South Africa and around the Horn. And this is elongating out freight lines. The ton miles, the tons you have to haul every bit of cargo is getting longer. The cost is going up. The fuel is going up. And it's causing disruptions in ports. If I handed one person an object and I had them start passing it around the room and I handed another thing to them and kept that going, we can get a nice little flow of goods going. But the minute you stop it and you cause that backlog, that's what happens with containers. There's a finite number of containers, finite number of ships, and when you elongate out the supply chain, what you do is you cause disruptions. Right now, we're seeing 2 million containers piled up in Singapore, waiting to get out. We're seeing disruptions in China, waiting to get out. And so the Houthi, by just targeting, and I will tell you the Houthi are not the greatest threat to ever face the world. They're really, in 6 months, they haven't done too much. They've sunk one ship, they've killed 3 mariners, which is a tragic loss. But in terms of being able to hit and interdict, they're not that great. But it's not the Houthi that's the problem, it's the insurance. Because global shipping companies are not going to pay the war risk insurance. 1% insurance on an 18,000 TEU ship, that ship carries about $1 billion worth of cargo. You would have to pay $10 million insurance. I'd much rather pay an extra $1 million in fuel to go around Africa, not have to pay the Egyptians $500,000, $600,000 in the Suez Canal toll, and go around Africa than do it. They are risk adverse, and they're always going to find the best way. Then you have the Panama Canal. That is not an enemy threat, that is a global threat. The Panama Canal has faced a water shortage over this past year. We are currently at the lowest level the canal has been ever. And right now we're seeing an uptick, but at the height here of the Panama Canal, remember I told you you can bring those new Neo-Panamax vessels through. You can go right from the west coast, right from China all the way over to the east coast and the Gulf Coast. Well, that Neo-Panamax lane uses a lot of water. The Panama Canal runs on fresh water, Gatun Lake. And when your lake level gets low, you can't run the canal efficiently. And what we've seen is a 2/3 reduction in the number of ships coming through the canal. You actually had a bidding process where every day the Panama Canal would bid off a route through the canal. And we saw bids up to several $1 million to get ships through the canal. Now the rain is coming up. A lot of people are doing rain dances in Panama, so the rain is starting to come up. New president in Panama is talking about new water management plans. However, the canal is still at the lowest level than it typically is, even though we're seeing a return to regular shipping. However, the global supply chain should be aware that this was a good example here of the environmental issues that we face. And then the last one I leave you with here is some prospects about where we should be looking in the future. I joked about at the very beginning there that there were 4 issues that appeared that nobody thought of. And that's the one that drives us crazy, because where the next threat emerges, where's the next Ever Given? Where's the next logjam off LA and Long Beach? Where's the next Houthis? Where are the next Dolly taking out the Francis Scott Key Bridge? We don't know, because those are almost impossible to predict. However, what I can predict is something's going to happen. And there is going to be a global disruption in shipping. But there are other disruptions that are on their way to be aware of. The International Maritime Organization, which is the kind of the UN agency that oversees shipping, has decreed that ocean shipping needs to reduce their carbon emissions by 50% by 2050. However, they're accelerating that, meaning that ships being built today will be out of service within 10 to 15 years because they'll have to adopt to new propulsion methods. And that means higher costs. That means the transportation costs at sea may increase. Ports are talking about green corridors, Shanghai to LA, for example, where they want vessels that are green in their emissions. That's going to put select ships on that route. That will diminish the number of vessels, the availability of tonnage out there for you to ship on, to go out. We are seeing new innovations all the time in global shipping and our ability to track. However, the disruptions we're seeing are having an effect. I used to talk about the idea of the black swan event. A black swan event is a rare event. When you see a black swan, it's a 1 in a million chance to see it. Well, over the past 3 years in global shipping, we've been hit by a flock of black swans. And we can't get the flock out of here in any way whatsoever. It has been a disruption of epic proportions. And one of the things I will give you on the kind of the upbeat note here is, one of the things about ocean shipping is it's kind of like water on the sidewalk. It'll find the crack. It'll find the way to get through. There are disruptions out there. There are potentially catastrophic disruptions should they happen in the South China Sea. A conflict with China and one of its neighbors could be a massive disruption. The Iranians in the Straits of Hormuz could be a massive disruption. We're seeing the Houthi reach out even further with their disruptions. We're seeing the resurgence of piracy off the coast of Somalia. We're seeing a kind of return to regionalism when it comes to ocean shipping with navies out there. But one of the things that I think gives me a lot of encouragement is that we always seem to overcome this. We have been able to change this around and keep the cargo flowing. There are disruptions. There are hazards out there. It's one of the reasons why you look toward freight forwarders and companies like Project 44 to help you, because again, understand, unless you want to become a scientist and study geopolitics all the time and understand all the finesses of global shipping, it's a very tough thing to do because it's always changing. It's always pushing back. That slide I had with all those little 10 stories on there. When you look at them individually, they don't seem like much, but when you string them together, they paint a very interesting picture about global shipping. I want to thank Project 44 for the opportunity to come out here. Hopefully I have not bored you with the lesson. There is no test on this and everything. And I'll be around for the rest of the conference. So thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you.